Cougs house. The Houston Cougars have five very important numbers hanging on the wall on the side of the Fertitta Center, but it's time to talk about adding more.
You are Locked On Coogs, your daily podcast on the Houston Cougars, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to Locked On Coogs, daily podcast about your Houston Cougars. I'm your host, Houston-born teacher and coach, Parker Ainsworth, here to break down all things Cougs. If you're a U of H fan or just a hater who came to stop by, please be sure to subscribe down below. That way you can listen to Cougs in your newsfeed each and every day. Appreciate you making Locked On Cougs your first and potentially also second listen of the day with this bonus episode of Locked On Cougs. If you're hitting subscribe because we're on YouTube, I tripped over the line because please subscribe to doing giveaway every 250 subscribers. That way we can get to 2,000, give some more stuff away. The next one of those markers is 2,000, a big one for us. Hit subscribe, helps get there. Like, comment the video, let us know your contest. If you don't know what to say, tell us who you're taking in the Super Bowl. Now, I said to say I want to get to this topic quickly because it's one that I'm having a lot of fun with this thought experiment on. Now, Houston, as a basketball program, Houston's a basketball school. It's got the most Final Fours in the state of Texas. It's growing into a perennial in the top five kind of program under Kelvin Sampson. We have revitalized the program in so many ways. And I think it's an interesting thought experiment to look at the retired numbers on the wall in the Fertitta Center and see who is up there, who can be added, and those kinds of things. So in quick and in short, I want to spend the first bit talking about the jersey retirements and stuff like that, kind of more broad scope, and then quickly dive into some, and we'll call it a second segment, but it could just all flow together, and looking at who from the Kelvin Sampson era, this revitalization time of Houston Cougar hoops, could be next. Now, Houston currently has five numbers and a name up on the wall. Guy V. Lewis, obviously, a legendary head coach that guided the program through so much of that rich basketball history for so long, frankly, as well. Helps integrate the school and the program. Big, important figure in college basketball history, let alone just Houston Cougar basketball history. Otis Birdsong, similar kind of contributions. Number 10 is up there and retired. Clyde Drexler up there, number 22 from nearby Dickinson, is up there and retired, right? Hakeem Olajuwon, 34. I don't think I can explain that one for you. Up there and retired. Michael Young, 42, up there and retired. Elvin Hayes, 44, up there and retired. The Big E. Now, I will say that that's three folks from Phi Slamma Jamma, which makes some sense. And then you've got Elvin Hayes from the late 60s and Otis Birdsong from the early 70s. And that kind of, I guess, mid-70s really for Otis Birdsong. I was born in 91, so yeah. That kind of spread shows the dominance in various portions of Houston Cougar basketball history, right? If you want to tell the story of Houston Cougar basketball, you can't not talk about Elvin Hayes in the late 60s and the game, the game that everyone saw in the most watched college basketball game of all time when they knocked off, at the time, Lou Alcindor and UCLA, perfect UCLA, of course. They knocked them off in the Astrodome, right? That's you can't not talk about that program. You can't not talk about the Phi Slamma Jamma and all the, cultural relevance of that, as well as the multiple Final Four runs that team had. I would argue very quickly and succinctly that 50 years from now, you won't be able to not talk about the last 5 years and potentially more coming of Houston Cougar basketball for a number of different reasons. One, you pull in soon-to-be Hall of Fame coach at some point, Kelvin Sampson. Now, I know he's got some stuff in his resume from once upon a time, but I would also point out a lot of those things are no longer things we look down upon as much college basketball. I think that those kind of things are past. I understand that at some point that the entire sport was dirty for a little while there, and things have been cleaned up. I'm not worried about those kinds of things keeping a guy like Kelvin Sampson as he climbs the wins ladder over 750 at this point. And anyway, I don't see that keeping out of the Hall of Fame someday. I just don't. And I look at the success he's had at both Oklahoma and Houston, Final Four success at both places, as evidence of a long career that spanned across multiple styles of basketball, multiple generations of basketball, multiple programs as well. It's an important guy. So Kelvin Sampson's name will be up there at some point, and he'll also be in the Hall of Fame at some point. And in this 5-year window, it's really bigger than that, but I'm focusing a lot on the last 5 years. I think you're seeing names that could very quickly be up there. Now, I should point out, because it was brought up on Twitter when I posed this, there are some technicalities involved. In the last 15 years, they have established parameters on how to have a jersey retired at the University of Houston, right? Now, at the University of Houston, you look at the ways to get your jersey retired. You have to have 2 of the following boxes checked. You have to be in the college basketball, or I guess they have the same rules for college football as well, Hall of Fame, okay, inducted in. Have won a major national award, like the Jerry West Award or the Bob Cousy Award or whatever, right? Be a consensus All-American. I think it's important in a second, and why that is as broad as it is. Conference MVP or Player of the Year. As conferences have changed, the award's been called different things, right? Be a multiple-time first-team all-conference person or player, or have an NCAA record to your name for 10 or more years, right? So in hindsight, as they go back and look at things, really all but one of the people on the board kind of conveniently already checked those boxes. And this is not to take away from Mike. I should point out, going into the fact that Michael Young is the one of the 5 that does not meet those criteria is not me denigrating his career at all. He had a monumental impact, along with the rest of Phi Slamma Jamma, on the Houston Cougar basketball program. However, at the time, you had so much talent on Houston's team in the program that realistically, they were kind of fighting each other for awards. There's only so much to go around. You can't have 3 dudes from the same team win Conference Player of the Year. They can't share it that way, right? And so, almost as a victim to his own teammates in that way, Michael Young was just a 3rd-team All-American. Just a 3rd-team All-American, air quotes, and 2nd-team All-Southwest Conference player, right? And that's the total individual accolades tied to his name, right? Now, I should point out his jersey was retired at Houston in 2007. I can't find an exact year. If you got, tell me in the comments on when these parameters went into place. But as we're sitting here in the start of 2023 or 2024, wrapping up 2023, I'd imagine that sometime in the last 16-ish years, that's been when that happened. I'd imagine like it was happened shortly after Michael Young, when they're like, okay, we got to start putting something on this. We can't just retire every number. I got a thought on that too, but I digress after that in a minute. You see then that in itself could limit who's eligible. Based on that reading, I see, technically speaking, 2 Houston Cougars eligible. The first and most obvious one from the Kelvin Sampson era that would be eligible is Marcus Sasser. Marcus Sasser has a number of these different parameters. He's checked off the idea. First of all, he's a program reference, a face of a program in a lot of ways. But he was a Jerry West Award winner. He was a All-Conference Player of the Year. He was or MVP of the conference. I think it was technically what's called the American. He was a first-team All-American. He was all these different things, right? He was a first-round draft pick. Not that that's listed as a thing, but he also was a first-round draft pick, right? He's, I think, the most gimme obvious choice as far as individual accolades go. I actually also, on technicalities, would argue very heavily for Quentin Grimes. Quentin Grimes was a Conference Player of the Year in the American Athletic Conference. He was a 3rd-team All-American in multiple national consensus publications. And as the rules technically don't delineate between 1st and 2nd and 3rd team, and we have Michael Young up there who was a 3rd team, I would argue fairly passionately that Quentin Grimes is eligible for this discussion at least. 24 could very well be up there with anybody else, right? And I think it's important that we reference these guys for a handful of reasons. And I want to jump into them in a second, and again in the second segment, and kind of talk about why these guys, why the Sampson era, why someone from the last 5 or 6 years deserves to be up there. But we're talking about legacies. We're talking about halls of fame. And there's probably no bigger place that things are built for that across all of sports than the Super Bowl. And it's the Super Bowl time of year, folks, right? And if you're like me and you're a weirdo that gets kind of weird about the Super Bowl, weirdo that gets weird about the Super Bowl, and you sit in the house alone and focus on the game the whole time, you have like a spread of Super Bowl food for you and you only. Okay, I do share with my wife. I'm not selfish, but you feel me, right? I want to see every second of the commercials, every second of the game, etc. I'm weird about it. And if you want to like make the game even more interesting, you can go do it at FanDuel because right now you can put down $5. If that bet hits, you get $200 back in bonus bets. And they have so many different ways to put that $5 down. You can do it on coin tosses. You can do it on length of the anthem. You can do it on scoregami, right? Color of the Gatorade being dumped on the winning coach. Both teams wear red. That feels simple. Who wins? They got the Chiefs as a 1.5 point dog. That seems ridiculous to me. I'm telling you, however ridiculous thing it is, you can put down $5 right now at FanDuel. Get that $200 back in bonus bets when you're right. Visit FanDuel.com/locked on. Sign up. That's FanDuel.com/locked on. Make every moment more with FanDuel. All right. So I mentioned that it's important, I think, for a couple reasons that we look at that Sasser and Grimes should both be eligible, but B, that the last 5 or 6 years, this early part of, I hope it's early part of the long reign of Sampson and company at top Houston Cougar basketball with a lot of success gets recognized in the Raptors the same way, is because the revitalization process was not easy. It was not an automatic, and it was not something that was guaranteed by any stretch, right? Houston makes it to a Final Four in 2021. And it is odd that you'd have a Final Four team, frankly, as good a team as that 2021 team was, a team that is also a member, I should point out, of the several years making Sweet 16s in a row. We're hoping to keep those streaks going as well. It'd be odd to have that kind of a team with zero representation on your jersey wall. Right now, Kelvin Sampson will have his name up there too, right? Much just next to Guy Lewis, right? But I think it makes sense to, when telling the story of Houston Cougar basketball, you're not going to leave out that Final Four. You couldn't do it. It wouldn't make sense. And telling the history of Houston Cougar basketball, you have to mention that. And so if you've got to go by the book and you're stuck in your ways, this 15-year-old rule we can't change. If that's your jam, that rules for the last 15 years are set in stone, I can't talk you out of it. But I can say that I think there's two, and there's certainly at least one guy within that meet the criteria. Now, Sasser probably fits the billing more so. Sasser probably gets the nod. I would argue for Quentin Grimes, or I would argue Quentin Grimes being from Houston, transferring back to U of H, coming back to his hometown from Kansas, probably symbolize a switch in the program that I don't know if we necessarily realized at the time, but it certainly set the stage for what we are at now. So I think that's important. I think there's some metaphorical thing there. I would also argue that you don't have to limit yourself to one. Five Slam and Jam got three, right? But I get it. I could see you putting either guy in, and I could make the argument. I think you got to put Sass. I think Grimes makes a good case. And frankly, I don't think you have to stop there. I don't. I also look at this and look at, like, as you're looking across all of this early part of, again, hopefully early part of the long reign of Sampson and company, the last 5 years were kind of set up by a number of guys that came before them, culture setters. And I understand it would require changing parameters or breaking and bending some rules that you've put on yourself as an institution. You put them on yourself. I think you can bend them. But the godfather that is Galen Robinson starts this whole thing. And you can't really tell the story of Houston Cougar basketball without him. You just can't. And that's not to say it's because I enjoy listening to him talk. I don't listen to folks before I record on the same topic, but I do like to listen to other Houston Cougar shows out there. Galen's a funny guy, right? Really, really charismatic, infectious. Not just because of that. He was also a tremendous talent. He also stayed home. he also set the stage for so much of what we see now. He's also intricately involved in the lives of all the guys on the last several years iterations of the team. He continues to stay a part of what's happening. All right. Now, I understand that he doesn't check every single one of these parameters and boxes. I think we can figure out a way around that to put 25 up there. Right. I think we can. Similarly, okay, I think the other name that's been tossed out there is, well, what about Jamal Shed? Right? Jamal Shed is still writing his history. He's still writing where he is in college basketball. He's still writing where his story will land. And I think that's all fair. You could very well see him as Conference Player of the Year this year if Houston wins the Big 12, which we'll argue tomorrow about how they're going to beat Kansas and do it. I'm not going to argue. I think you and I will agree, but I'm going to argue with Derek about it. You'll meet Derek tomorrow. I also think it's worth pointing out that he did win Conference Defensive Player of the Year. And if Marcus had not been his teammate, he might have won Conference Player of the Year a year ago. That's kind of the same thing we talked about with Michael Young at the top of the show too, right? And I also think it's worth pointing out that, like, when you look at a bunch of other factors and things coming in, like college basketball has dramatically changed a lot. Houston has dramatically changed a lot, but college basketball, these, getting put to the American, getting put in Conference USA, hurt a lot of guys' chances from ever doing this because you didn't see a whole lot of AAC or CUSA guys making All-American lists. I mean, that was why it was so stupendous when Sasser did it, or even when Grimes made the third team. And so that this year, Jamal Shed and Houston are in the Big 12, and it kind of feels like, well, this might be his only chance to make first or second team All-American because they're in the Big 12. Like, almost seems silly, and I'm being a little hyperbolic. Obviously, Marcus was just a first team All-American last year, but they weren't going to give a single AAC team two guys on the first team All-American list. That wasn't going to happen just from a perceptions thing, right? Anyway, college basketball's changed. It's gotten big dollars, it's gotten big TV budgets. They're not going to do that. I would also point out, and this is in going past Jamal Shed, that we have to open these rules and parameters to the fact that college basketball has just flat changed. A lot of these things, when you look at the parameters, you're looking at things you have to have done over several years or build up to. It's hard to be an All-American player as a freshman. They just don't give that out. You kind of have to build your resume over a couple of years. It's not technically a legacy award, but they don't give it to very many freshmen. And for what it's worth, you're going to continue to build a program where, like, Sampson doesn't get one and done guys that often, but you're going to tell me Jarris, if we get a bunch of 5-star players in the next 5 years, you're telling me Jarris Walker didn't have an impact on that? It didn't start that. It didn't start the story of Houston Cougar basketball being the kind of program that gets those 5-star kids. I think that's too tied up together. And I think you can't tell the story of Houston Cougar basketball without it. Now, obviously, that's down the road. That's me going on and on about, like, what could happen. That has not happened yet. But setting the stage for who does and doesn't get their name up there as a part of Houston Cougar basketball, as part of names you can't leave out, right? Based on a rule written in the last 15 years ago, when the sport has dramatically changed, seems absurd and silly. It doesn't seem right. Now, I would argue again, you had a Final Four trip in 2021. You got a guy from that trip that fits all the bills. I think he's an automatic, and I think Zero was hanging up there very soon. And I don't think it's any accident that they're going to put it right next to Kelvin Sampson, because right now it goes Guy Lewis and then the numbers, coaches before. So I can imagine you put Kelvin Sampson right there next to Guy Lewis, and then the numbers are in numerical order. So what will come before Zero? Nothing. They're going to go right there next to each other. And I don't think that's questionable. I think I can make the argument with you, if you're open to hearing it, that others are. And I think it's a fun thought experiment because we get to talk about guys like Rob Gray. We get to talk about Reggie Chaney and the impact he had on the program. And frankly, point out that those guys wore the same number. Can you just put a blank 32 up there and just let it hang? Right? Like those kinds of conversations are so much fun to have, that denying it over some arbitrary rule written for a different generation of college basketball, seems silly. And I'm willing to have them. I'm happy to have them. I'm enjoying having them. But I think it's Sasser. I'd argue for Grimes. And for what it's worth, I think there's a real possibility you can look back in 5 or 6 years like, we kind of have to throw Jarris in there. Or you look back and say, like, okay, Jamal Shedd didn't win Big 12 Player of the Year, but he got to go in there, right? I think that's all a very serious possibility because you cannot tell the story of this program. I don't foresee being able to tell the story of this program without those dudes. And we're finding other parameters to make these honors that, but that's what this is. And for what it's worth, I got 2 final points here that'll be really quick. I know I've gone longer than I said I would. For one, I think the key thing to reference that is not a Kelvin Sampson guy, but a guy that I think is important enough to get included in this as well, and that is Don Chaney. Don Chaney needs his number up there. And what Elvin Hayes did on the basketball court was obviously more tremendous than what Don Chaney did. But what Don Chaney did for the program, for the school, and for the South, and for the United States of America, frankly, is as impactful. And he and Elvin Hayes did it together, right? And I think that means you need to put him up there because that's more important. And again, when you're telling the story of Houston Cougar basketball, his name needs to be in it. And I'm not willing to tell without him. And I think his name and jersey needs to be up there. Okay, I'll say that. The other point I was going to make is much more lighthearted. I would point out that a fear from some people is, well, if we put every number for everybody, we're going to run out of numbers. A, you're not. But B, you just passed a rule in college basketball allowing people to wear numbers 6, 7, 8, and 9. Or 16, 17, 18, 19. Or 26, 27, 20, etc. Right? Because before, because of old heads and old number rules, people were not allowed to wear digits on their jersey that could not be that had more than 5 because they had to be able to show them with. So you had to be no more than 55, 5, right? One hand each. Because when the ref signaled to the table, he had to be able to signal, or he or she had to be able to signal your number with their 2 hands. That rule is bygone. Malik Wilson's wearing 8 this year because he can, right? They've changed that rule. If I don't know, Mercy Miller shows up next year. He says, I want 6 because I like LeBron James growing up. He can wear 6. So you just legitimately added so you had 4 numbers for the 10 you had, plus kids can now wear like 77 like Luka or 84 because I liked Randy Moss. Like you've added not infinite, but so many more numbers to the books here. You're not going to run out. You're just not. That's not a real problem. Stop making it a fake one. That's my 2 cents there. If you've got more sense than that or more sense than me, tell me in the comments down below what you think or who you would add as well to the list. There's a long list. Houston Cougars basketball's got a bunch of great names tied to it, and it's a fun time to be a Houston Cougar basketball fan. Now, I said today we'd have a football and a basketball episode. I got sidetracked with this one because it's a ton of fun. Tomorrow, I may have 2 episodes to preview Kansas. One, we're going to talk to Derek Johnson from Locked On Jayhawks. He's going to come on and talk to us some about that matchup. We'll do a crossover with both perspectives. I've also been working on a scouting report, so I want to get that out on the air as well. So you might get 2 episodes out tomorrow. Locked On Coogs is a proud Locked On Packers. That means your team, our Cougs, up in the banners and on the floor and on the field every day. Go Cougs.